Here's a declassified CIA guide written in 1983 to train CIA operatives in the field on how to organize riots in foreign countries. And here's a tab on using agitators, including hiring professional criminals to manipulate mass meetings and assemblies of people in person, which can result in general violence. And you will see that they advocate for general violence, where the CIA tells the case officers, our psychological war team must develop in advance a hostile mental attitude among the target groups so that at the given moment, they can turn their anger into violence, demanding the rights taken away by the regime. So make these ethnic minority groups so mad at their government in a general sense that whenever we snap the trigger at the given moment, they will turn that general anger into physical violence against the state that we want to overthrow. But this is a CIA guide on getting teachers, doctors, attorneys, and businessmen in a cluster cell recruited as social crusaders for the CIA-backed cause. And then note what it says. Through a gradual process, these cells, your 10 super teachers with a lot of influence in the teaching realm, your 10 lawyers with a lot of influence in the legal realm, your 10 captains of industry with a lot of influence in business, your 10 medical professionals with a lot of pull over the hospital systems will each work within their own spheres of influence. And at the appropriate time, their influence will be used to fuse the groups together into a united front. Using the tactics of a force of 200 to 300 agitators, one can create a demonstration in which 10,000 to 20,000 could take part. All we need are 200 back channels, 200 human assets that we've capacity built, and we can get 20,000 people to commit a violent riot in a fury of violence against their own government. That's where we are. We're in Nicaragua in 1983. Where we seem to come back time and time again, right? If you remember, we did a 7-part stream watch of the Octopus murders, which was about Iran-Contra in the early 1980s. We did a 9-part movie watch of the documentary Inside the CIA. We did 3 movie watches. We did 6 movie watches over 3 episodes of Counterintelligence. Half of them covered 1983 Nicaragua. And one of the reasons that we touch it so much is because it was the last time that we've had substantial declassification of a busted CIA operation. But it was also because it did go south and it was busted and it didn't work. It's an interesting period because 1983 is also the year that the National Endowment for Democracy was founded. And the reorganization of intelligence work, primarily through NGOs, primarily through a mass spawn of cutout organizations under the banner of democracy promotion, got started. So 1983 is sort of a big year in the history of the changing structure of how we do CIA work. But this document was, so it was only declassified 7 years ago. And I'm always surprised at how there's so little press on some of these crazy-ass documents. So I'm going to just read a little bit. It's been some time since I've gone through it. I have some points outlined here, but I'm just going to, here's the index up top. Again, this is for CIA eyes only and State Department and anyone with a security clearance who's on a need to know about an operation on this. And now we civilians get to see it. So here's the index. Tab A, interaction with the populace through group dynamics. So these are veteran, CIA operatives writing a field guide for people in the shit today on how we do this. And the first one is interaction with the populace through group dynamics. Group dynamics. Tab B, and again, we're coming back to this theme of racial rent-a-riots, identity-based rent-a-riots, how to overthrow governments by getting minority and disaffected fringes to all unite against the central government. Because they're all mad at the government for their own reasons, so they can all be instrumentalized and capacity built with money and training to move against the government. Tab B, armed propaganda as a constructive vehicle for garnering popular support. So notice how garnering popular support is a big part of this. Now you can understand why there's so much CIA media and why media is so important to the CIA. Because you need popular support for the popular movement. And propaganda is necessary for that. Now, here in tab C, you'll see it says emphasis on the Christian nature of the guerrilla movement. Now, this is specific to Nicaragua in 1983. At the time, one of the reasons that the Pentagon and the State Department and the CIA created the drug trade in Latin America was because left-wing Marxist groups had been rising to power. Religiously agnostic or atheistic Marxist groups were rising to power in Latin America, starting in a big way in the 1950s, alongside Cuba's communist revolution. And they were overthrowing the U.S. control over their governments that had existed since the Banana Wars in the 1800s. Frankly, that had existed since the Monroe Doctrine in 1823. And so these Marxist groups were easily portrayed as atheistic hordes, and the role of churches became a big part of the strategy of the CIA, just as it was in Europe with the Vatican and the alliance between the CIA and the Vatican in combating communism in Central and Eastern Europe, a topic we've been over probably 200 hours worth in granular detail. Okay, tab D, political awareness of guerrillas should be as acute as their capacity to fight. So they're saying, listen, we're training paramilitary groups to take to the streets and, if necessary, conduct military action against the government. But grooming their political support is as important as arming them with weapons drove in through an open border in Texas or Arizona through cartels or through Mormon groups or through, at the time, Second Amendment pro-gun right-wing anti-communist groups like the Texas Lightfoot Infantry. At the time, the CIA really loved these Second Amendment groups because they were useful mules to help the anti-communist war in Latin America. Tab D says prohibition against gratuitous violence. Tab F, use of agitators, including the hiring of professional criminals to manipulate mass meetings and assemblies, which can result in general violence. I'm just going to zoom, enhance. Here's a declassified CIA guide written in 1983 to train CIA operatives in the field on how to organize riots in foreign countries. And here's a tab on using agitators, including hiring professional criminals to manipulate mass meetings and assemblies of people in person, which can result in general violence. And you will see that they advocate for general violence. Not gratuitous violence, they say, but general violence. And if you want to just, again, skip to the money shot, which we went over last week, we will literally come to the part where the CIA tells the case officers, our psychological war team must develop in advance a hostile mental attitude among the target groups so that at the given moment they can turn their anger into violence, demanding the rights taken away by the regime, okay? So make these ethnic minority groups so mad at their government in a general sense that whenever we snap the trigger at the given moment, they will turn that general anger into physical violence against the state that we want to overthrow. Do you guys all see this? Do you want to get a temporary tattoo and just, you know, put it on your forearm for a couple weeks? Just for a couple weeks, so that you can understand that we literally have formal SOPs, a formal special, standard operating procedure in the U.S. government to radicalize and piss off racial minority groups in a general sense against their society, so that at the correct political trigger, they can turn those racial groups to take down the Trump administration. I'm sorry, a government. And we literally went through examples of this from 2020 with the military group effectively run by Rosa Brooks, a senior Obama White House official with a CIA blue badge, who contemplated doing exactly this if Trump won the 2020 election, including doing favors and bribing Black Lives Matter so that they would turn this anger into violence and into rent-a-riots against the Trump regime. Okay, let's get back. So, they will even hire criminals to manipulate the peaceful protests in order to turn them violence. The CIA handed this book to DHS. I need to do like a general lecture on the CIA and DHS because it's an amazing tag team that those two agencies have together. But no, I mean, this, as I talked about, this is a CIA guide for case officers in Nicaragua as they were trying to overthrow Nicaragua's government in 1983. Okay. Hard SJW. I guess you weren't here for last week because we did like 2 hours connecting it to George Floyd in Minneapolis and the Somali refugees and Tim Waltz's Where's Waldo trip through CIA World, through USAID and the Harvard Institute for International Development, to him being the chairman of the Special Forces Caucus, while the Special Forces' job is literally to do these racial rent-a-riots. Him denying Mayor Fry's request for the National Guard to break up the riots when they broke out. So if you're not familiar, just watch last week's stream. Okay. Tab G, again, the CIA, creating a martyr for the cause. CIA encouraging handlers to create a martyr for the cause, a George Floyd figure. Or if you remember in the case of that Netflix movie about the Algerian immigrant insurrection against the French government. It was the killing of an Algerian kid in the movie to kick off the racial rent-a-riots. And of course, the Algerians had literally asked the CIA for help in assassinating Charles de Gaulle after Charles de Gaulle threatened to move France out of NATO. Tab H, selective use of violence for propaganda. This is our government. Not gratuitous violence, just general violence and selective violence. It was called Athena, Doreen. Again, we played this all on last week's stream. Tab I, implicit and explicit terror. Yay! We're terrorists. Don't you love her? I mean, this is not like the 1800s. This is 1983. By the way, it's all the same people who are in government now from like the 1983. I mean, this was the whole Bush world. Elliot Abrams was in charge of this Iran-Contra situation. And, you know, he like ran Western Hemisphere policy for the Trump administration. It was the same people in power. All right. Sorry, getting a little hot. All right. So let's keep moving through this. Okay. So I think I noted this in my summary. Hold on a second. So this is the preface document. And I'm just going to pull it up on this page. Oh, hold on a second. Now, this is a document about getting, they're calling it guerrilla warfare, which is not really a term used as much anymore. Now, you can think of it as paramilitary, basically an informal organization with the capacity to exert force in some sort of kinetic way. But that's what rent-a riots are. Rent-a riots are paramilitary street muscle. The only difference between a paramilitary and a military is a military is a formal organization, and oftentimes more money, which means they can buy bigger toys, bigger, you know, tanks and Air Force type thing. But if the State Department and the CIA and USAID and the Pentagon give the paramilitary enough muscle, then they can beat the military. And a great example of this is Mexico. The paramilitary muscle of the Sinaloa cartel is more powerful than the formal military of the government of Mexico, which is why the government of Mexico cannot control the Sinaloa cartel. They have basically separate turfs, and they will occasionally scuffle, but they don't challenge them with giant raids on their compounds because the paramilitary is stronger than the military. Okay, but notice, even though this is about paramilitary activities, just on page 1 of the preface of the CIA Psychological Operations Guide, because, like, don't lose sight of that. The name of this guide is called Psychological Operations. And psychological operations is about political warfare. I just highlighted all the times in the PSYOPs manual it emphasizes on page 1 the word political. Guerrilla warfare is essentially political war. That's one. For this reason, its areas of operations go beyond the territorial limits of conventional warfare, penetrating the political animal. This is 3 mentions of the word political in the first paragraph alone. It's a political war. The most critical point of the human being is the mind. Once the mind has been reached, the political animal has been vanquished without necessarily receiving any shots. This is your Central Intelligence Agency, ladies and gentlemen. Guerrilla warfare emerges and grows in a political environment, in the constant struggle to dominate that area of the political mentality, which is inherent in every human being. This concept of guerrilla warfare as political war turns psychological operations into the factor that determines the results. The target, then, are the minds of the population, the entire population. Our troops, the enemy troops, and the civil population. Now, I cannot friggin' stress this enough, okay? This is the CIA saying this. And you guys know from the chart we always go over. The CIA is the support unit for the two mommy and daddy agencies. Mommy is the State Department. Daddy is the Pentagon. And the CIA is like the 14-year-old kid who's like, you know, young and limber enough to, you know, do a lot of the hard grunt work to help around the farm. Okay? No pun intended with the farm there. Folks who know what I mean by that. So the targets, so here they're saying, listen, we have an in-process operation from the U.S. military to support the paramilitary rebels in Nicaragua to overthrow the government. But like all of our, like you as a case officer, understand how we do things. So it's our guys, our rebel paramilitary against Nicaragua's government military. But in order to win this, we need to control the third variable, which is the entire population of Nicaragua. We need to control the mind of the entire population of Nicaragua in order to win the military objective of the Pentagon. Does this sound familiar? Do you guys remember the Special Forces guide from last week we went over? Where the State Department and the Pentagon wanted to stop China's naval port construction in a Western African country. The African government did an Elon. They said GFY, State Department. So, you know, no does not mean no to the Special Forces. So what they did is they then they said, okay, government, you're not going to do what we want. We're now going to go to the civil population. They activated their assets in the African workers. They ran a psychological operation through media and social media to inflame racial sentiments against the Chinese, to kick off racial rent-a-riots against the Chinese, to burn down the Chinese businesses, and to have mass boycotts to deprive the Chinese corporations of 60% of their workforce, crushing the African economy. And then they went back to the African government and said, your population is turned against you. We can make this stop. And then the government played ball. But understand what this does. While the CIA thinks it's being cute here, while the Special Forces thinks it's being cute here, that means every single human being who lives in Nicaragua, and as we'll see, around every human being around the world, becomes a casualty in a proxy war being conducted by the PSYOPs team. Because as part of, and we went over some of the structure last week, but as part of this operation, they're going to have hundreds of millions of dollars of media flown in to glorify the Nicaraguan Contras. They're going to run a demonization campaign against the Sandinista government. You're going to have Hollywood movies. You are going to have musical groups. You're going to have art demonstrations at Art Basel in Miami. Putting this hero versus villain arc on a global stage. And you will read it in your Wall Street Journal and your New York Times. The printed lies that are going to you in order to get you to support more war funding and more U.S. aid funding for the Contras, and to influence audiences around the world into joining the pressure campaign against the Nicaraguan government and to providing their own country's support to the Nicaraguan Contras. So all this damage is done. All of these lies infect the minds of American people because of the necessity, the perceived necessity, in the minds of the CIA and the U.S. military of winning a military or paramilitary conflict by controlling the minds of the civilian class. And I really can't stress that point enough, but we'll go deeper on it now. By the way, how is the pace of this? Is this okay for you guys? Let me know any feedback in the chat. Is this too heavy, the energy? Because we're like just getting started. I want to make this like, I feel like last week was really fun. Okay. Pace is food. Oh man, I should order food. Okay. What happened to the music? You guys can't hear the music? I can hear the music. I just turned it up a little bit. Let me turn it up a little more. Okay, so as we talked about, this book is a guerrilla training manual for psychological operations as it is applied to the specific case of the Christian and Democratic crusade being conducted in Nicaragua by the Freedom Commandos. Okay. So now let's get into the contents. Okay, introduction, propagandist, guerrilla. We need to come up with a different way, because I want you guys to translate this into, because guerrilla is not really a term that's used as much anymore, because guerrilla implies military. And the way things have moved since 1983 is that we don't say we're supporting guerrillas. We say that we're supporting resistance movements, oppressed resistance movements. So I'm just going to use the word resistance instead of guerrilla. We'll say rebels. Propagandist resistance combatants. Armed propaganda teams. Development and control of front organizations. Oh no! AKA CIA cutouts. Okay? So there's a whole tab on how to develop. And what does develop mean? Say the words. What is international development? What is regional development? What is local development? 2 words. What is that? Come on. Somebody's got it. Capacity building, exactly. Now notice, and this is something that's subtle, but just so you guys learn the language of CIA speak. Development of front organizations. So that is what development is, guys. Again, everything that you see that the State Department does, or USAID does, or the National Endowment for Democracy does, they call it development. International development, regional development, local development. It's just capacity building their front organizations. That's all it is. Anytime you see $1 of US aid on development, it is building up an asset. But there are 2 challenges in order to have an asset be effective. They have to be capacity built, i.e. developed, and they have to be controlled. Because if you capacity build an organization, a university center, a pop-up journalism outlet, a local newspaper, a local hospital system, a local NGO, a gun store in the area. You give them money, and it's implied they'll do what you say, but what if they don't? You need to have a liaison who is able to exert control. And this is where you start getting into the division of labor between the CIA and the State Department. Okay? Okay. How do I enlarge this? Okay, well this is fine. So, coming back to our trifecta here, and again, USAID is right in the middle of all three of these. So in exerting soft power in order to create rent-a riots, the Department of Defense will spend hundreds of millions doing hearts and minds work, i.e. psychological operations. The State Department, both directly but also through USAID and through the National Endowment for Democracy, will capacity build a network of soft power assets, and the CIA or a CIA front will liaise and work with the State Department's capacity built network. Okay? That's how all these work in harmony. So when this slide says development and control of front organizations, development means the State Department and USAID and the NED and Internews and all the other, and the 10,000 State Department NGOs that will coordinate that development. And control is going to be done directly or indirectly through CIA, meaning back channeling. Okay? Because the State Department has the money to build it up, and the CIA, the State Department doesn't want to directly control a front organization, because that's a massive scandal if it gets caught, because that has direct fingerprints of the US government. But the CIA's job is plausible deniability. So if it's a CIA back channel, it's not a formal act of diplomacy of the US. You can say, oh, they went rogue, they weren't supposed to do that. And again, the CIA's job is to create 7 layers of shell companies and pass through intermediaries in order to do that back channel. And again, I will stress this. That is why the literal book, the autobiography of the current CIA director, Bill Burns, is called The Back Channel. I'm in the middle of reading it right now, by the way. It's like my walk to Dunkin' Donuts audiobook in my ear right now. Very interesting, I should note. I want to do kind of like a book report at the end. But this guy, Bill Burns, is the head of our CIA. And his book title is called The Back Channel. And the whole thing is a memoir of all the back channeling that's done in diplomacy work, okay? So, getting back to this, development of front organizations is done by the State Department, USAID, National Endowment for Democracy, the NGO swarm. And the back channeling is done through intelligence. So you have that 1-2 punch, so that you build them up to be effective, and they don't go rogue. They do what you say. All right, let's get back to it. Okay. Oh, this one's good. Control of the masses and meetings. It's really good. This is a great one from what I remember. Grassroots massive support through psychological operations. Ah! Grassroots. There's nothing says grassroots more than the CIA literally pre-planning it all through a psychological operation. But of course, what they're saying here is, how do you get the thing to take on a life of its own? Through first giving it a shove through our soft power team. How do we get a grassroots support for Black Lives Matter? To destabilize a Trump administration? How do we get grassroots support for the Uyghur ethnic minority group in China? How do we get grassroots support in Myanmar for the Rohingya ethnic group struggle against the military junta? And so, you know, this section that we'll go over is like, how do you get the thing to take on a life of its own after setting them up to believe that in the first place? So let's crack into it. And again, I literally outlined this like 7 years ago. And I did a cursory in the syllabus. I did like a cursory thing of a few things that I was looking for. But I feel like there's a lot of good stuff that I just that I missed like while skimming. So I might cheat a little bit and like read it as I go, and then just make note of the things that I had already put in my guide here. Hold on, let me catch up on the chat here. One sec. Hold on, I'm just catching up on chat, so I'm just letting the music ride a little bit while I do. Let's see. Is anyone? Back channel. Poop shit. It's funny. Confidential informants. Bill Burns. Let's see. Bill Burns was born on Fort Bragg? Is that true? He was born on Fort Bragg? Oh, that is wild. That's amazing. Okay. Okay. And can you guys see this, by the way, at like this, at this zoom level? You can see this on page? I think so. Interesting. The aim of this book is to introduce the resistance student to psychological operation techniques. The nature of the environment in resistance movements does not allow sophisticated psychological operations, and it becomes necessary for the group, detachment, and squadron leaders to carry out with minimal direction from the upper echelons psychological action operations with the contacts who know the realities from the roots. Propagandist resistance movements. In order to obtain the maximum results, you have to be highly motivated to engage in propaganda face-to-face to the same degree the motivated fight. That means that the political awareness... Okay, hold on a second. Okay, teaching people to be persuasive in face-to-face communications, that he's capable of giving 5 to 10 logical reasons to support the struggle. Okay. Armed propaganda includes every action performed, and the good impression which this armed force may give will result in the population having a positive attitude towards those forces. It does not include forced indoctrination. Armed propaganda improves the behavior of the population towards its author and is not achieved by force. This means that an armed resistance unit in a rural town will not give the impression that its weapons are a force that they hold over the peasants, but rather that they are the strength of the peasants against the repressive Nicaraguan government. This is achieved through a close identification with the population as follows. Hanging up the weapons, and this is a little bit specific to Nicaragua in 1983. So again, I'm sort of reading this, skimming this as I go because I want to emphasize different points. But I'm just trying to see if there's anything relevant here. Okay. Boom, 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 boom. Okay. Okay, so rolling out simple slogans and adopting the demands of the people for hospital and education, a reduction of taxes, etc. Now, this is really interesting because, again, if we pop open our Transition Integrity Project, this is the Rent a Riot guide that Rosa Brooks from the U.S. military under Obama and Nils Gilman from the Berggruen Institute under Reid Hoffman and 6 U.S. military, intelligence, national security, and political operatives, including Donna Brazile and Michael Steele, the former heads of the RNC and DNC, and John Podesta, role-playing Joe Biden personally, conducted in June 2020 and then wrote a report on in August 2020. And you'll see that it literally says in the report, a show of numbers. Let me move this over a little bit. A show of numbers in the streets and actions in the streets may be the decisive factor in determining what the public perceives as a just and legitimate outcome. So again, this is military CIA networks in cahoots with both the Never Trump Republicans and the head of the recent head of the Democrat National Committee, saying that in a close election, what we're going to really need are people in the streets taking action in the streets in order to convince the public that Trump didn't win the election, even if he did. During Transition Integrity Project's exercise, Team Biden almost always called for and relied on mass protests to demonstrate the public's commitment to a legitimate outcome. As a practical matter, however, participants in the exercise know that racial justice activists and others will likely act independent of the campaign. Players repeatedly caution these social movements are independent, not beholden to or a tool of the Democratic Party. Their support or Biden's ability to mobilize them cannot be taken for granted. And because that was not robustly tested, because the exercise did not just assumed that BLM would take to the streets for the Biden campaign, they call for, between June and November, for the participants in the military and intelligence world and in politics to test BLM's likely receptivity to a, quote, Biden call to take to the streets, and the Biden campaign's ability to control these actors once mobilized. Remember, development and control. Remember how much money BLM got to capacity build the organization between June and November. If anything, and again, these are not random people saying this. This is the Undersecretary of Defense with a CIA blue badge, with John Podesta and Donna Brazile and Bill Kristol and Michael Steele and 6 others. We only know about a dozen of them, but they said there were about 60 to 70 people across the military, intelligence, political, and civil society fields who were all part of this fucking political event 201. And that's as if anything, the scale of the recent demonstrations, i.e. BLM, has increased the stakes for the Democrat Party to build strong ties with BLM and be responsive to the movement's demands between now and the election. So let's go back to the CIA guide. And remember, Rosa Brooks had a CIA blue badge and literally teaches courses at Georgetown on democratization, how to overthrow governments. So the CIA says, hey, it's us against a regime we want to topple, but we need to control the hearts and minds of the civil population to assist us and to go against the regime. So everybody else's mind becomes a casualty of a mind war being waged. And one of the things the CIA guide calls for is for the resistance movement, even though it has no interest in the demands of the people that it's stashing weapons near, that they should tell people that they are adopting the demands about hospitals and education, reducing taxes, so that the people will join the fight against the government or will see them sympathetically. Be receptive to their demands, the CIA says, even though it has nothing to do with our war, but we just want them on our side. And what did the CIA guide say in 2020 in case Trump won the election? Because Biden will need to call BLM out to take to the streets, and the Biden campaign needs the ability to control BLM once it's mobilized on the streets. In the meantime, we should spend the next 5 months being responsive to the movement's demands, giving them what they want. He goes on to say, large base building groups on the progressive side will need to anchor this strategy. This is again the 2020 Domestic Color Revolution Guide published by the Transition Integrity Project under Rosa Brooks. Large base building groups on the progressive side will need to anchor this strategy, but their success will likely depend on supporting and resourcing new and emerging racial justice leaders, many of whom are not affiliated with formal institutions and coalitions. So this is CIA Blue Badge holder Rosa Brooks in a role-play simulation with John Podesta, Hillary Clinton's campaign manager, and now in charge overseeing $375 billion of climate slush funds in the White House as we speak. Right as the riots break out in May 2020, they hold this tabletop exercise in June 2020 and say we need these racial rent-a-riots of aggrieved racial justice groups as our little pawns to use to make Trump look like a dictator, to destroy the American economy, to take to the streets, to shut down federal buildings, to burn police precincts, until the population says, oh my God, we just want peace. Give them what they want. Trump, get out. You're not the legitimate president, even though you won the Electoral College. And what they literally call for is they say, listen, we can't 100% control BLM now, but to anchor this strategy, what if we pay them a shitload of money? What if we support BLM and resource new and emerging racial justice leaders? What if we get little puppets on our payroll? And because they're dependent on us for money, and they're happy with how much we bribed them with, they will be responsive to a call to take to the streets. And notice they even complain about Trump's ability to use DHS to have the National Guard suppress the racial justice protesters. Oh God. Where does that sound familiar? And remember, just now, this same group at Georgetown is trying to do legal measures to prevent Trump, if he becomes president, from being able to use the National Guard against destructive riots. You can look all that up. I don't want to waste more time on it, but you know, that's all like publicly reported in the news as of 3 weeks ago. So just note how closely the domestic CIA veteran group plans its color revolution tactics against Trump with the formal CIA guide for how to do this against foreign countries. Let me just catch up on the chat real quick. Okay, cool. Okay. Okay, this is weapon specific, so I'm gonna skip a little bit. Okay. Development and control of front organizations. How funny is this? By the way, I'm super hungry right now. I'm like friggin' starved. I kind of want to order some food. Do you guys mind? I normally make eggs around this time, but I kind of feel like maybe I can order some Chipotle. Oh, did you guys see this thing? By the way, let me just take like a comedy break for a second while I order some food. Did you guys see this Chipotle thing? The Chipotle CEO. He's the Starbucks. What is his work day? Twitter. You guys see this? This is wild. Hold on a second here. Okay, hold on a second. That's crazy. Let me see if I can. How can I put this on the screen without showing my other stuff? If someone can find it and post it and post the link in the chat, I have it in my bookmarks, but I don't want to like reveal all my bookmarks on screen. Whatever. Okay, hold on a sec. Let me just insta order my Chipotle. Okay. Let's see. Orders. I really want pizza, but I gotta be good. You gotta be good, Benzie. Pizza would be so good right now. Pizza with some pineapple. Oh. That's what I had last night. I had a pineapple cocktail. I'm a sucker for pineapple. It's so sweet. Reminds me of Hawaii. Okay. Order has been placed. The Contrarian says, I'm sure they have transition integrity project for 2024. Yeah, we went over it last week. You guys are not caught up on your homework. We literally went over it last week. It's right here. It was published 3 weeks ago. It was Rosa Brooks. Here you go. You want to see it? Boom. In the chat. Oh my God, I'm so hungry. I'm so hungry. This is the thing. When I work out and I lift, I like... Every fiber in my body is like, feed the machine. Okay. All right, let me X out of this. Are we back? Are we back? I think we're so back. I believe we are so back. All right. Development and control front organizations. The development and control front organizations is carried out through internal, subjective, concealed control through group meetings of the internal cadres, and these elements apply to the masses. Established citizens, doctors, everyone becomes an instrument of statecraft. I mean, just look at this. One second. Fuck. Can't get the zoom right. Okay. Established citizens, doctors, attorneys, businessmen, teachers, etc. will be recruited initially as social crusaders in typically innocuous movements, mostly harmless movements in the area of operations. When their involvement with the clandestine organization is revealed to them, this exerts psychological pressure on them so that they can be used as internal cadres in groups to which they already belong or groups which they could join. Then, through a gradual and skillful process, they will receive instruction in persuasion techniques for the control of target groups, which will support our democratic revolution. A system for the control of cells isolates individuals from one another, and at the appropriate moment, their influence is used to fuse the groups together into a united national front. And again, note that use of the phrase "at the appropriate moment." Note how many times we're seeing in this structuring guide that it's about development and control of a capacity. And this is why we call it capacity. It means, capacity just means the ability to do something. It doesn't mean doing it. Now, a dozen times on stream, I've been over the inauguration of organized political warfare in 1948. Oh, wow, there's a super chat here. Mike's Dinner Fund from Susan. Susan Hooling? Hooling, am I saying that right? Susan Hooling? Thank you so much. Wow. All right. Appreciate that, Susan. That will definitely cover the Chipotle. Comfortably. Quite comfortably. So this is why we call it capacity building. First of all, it sounds a lot nicer than asset cultivation or overthrowing a government. It means we have built the capacity to do it in case we ever need to or want to. At the appropriate moment. But where we don't want to be stuck is not having the capacity and then an emergency moment being needed, but we can't pull it off because we don't have the capacity in place. And let me just pull this up so you guys are reminded. I know we've been over this document. We literally line by lined it on a stream like 10 streams ago, but it's just very, it's just so, it's like, you know, one of the most important declassified papers of all time, in my view. So again, this is one of the CIA's godfathers, George Kennan, famously penned the long telegram. But one of his lesser known works, which is frankly far more interesting and important, is this document that he wrote 12 days after the U.S. rigged the Italian election. Stuffing ballot boxes, working with the Italian mafia, working with the Vatican Bank to launder money, tens of millions of dollars, to pull off a come-from-behind victory against the socialist presidential candidate in the first Italian election after World War II. Was Vanilla Sky about heroin? No. You're thinking that movie about Coney Island with Jared Leto. What am I thinking? Mind. So, what is that movie about heroin with Jared Leto or Jude Law? Was it? You guys know what I'm talking about. That was a good movie. That had a crazy soundtrack. Okay. And this document in 1948 is called The Inauguration of Organized Political Warfare. And this is a memo saying, listen, we just created the CIA. We just pulled off our first regime change operation. It went awesome. We need to do this everywhere. This should not have been, no, it wasn't Train Spotting. It was a different one. We need to do this everywhere, not just in Italy. We need to inaugurate organized political warfare to control elections in every country around the world. And we need to overcome the American people's resistance. Because the American people are hamstrung, we've been handicapped by a popular attachment to the concept of a basic difference between peace and war. By the tendency to view war as a sort of sporting contest outside of all political context. And the reluctance to recognize the realities of international relations. Requiem for a Dream, that's what I was thinking. Yep. So, we just rigged this election in Italy. But it was really close. We scrambled it together at the last minute. This is what George Kennan says. Now notice how he proposes it be structured, okay? We need a propaganda operation. We need clandestine support for political movements in every country around the world. And political warfare should be directed and coordinated by the Department of State. Again, this is the godfather of the CIA, saying the CIA needs to do this, what we just did in Italy, much more aggressively around the world because this went so well. Of course, the State Department our CIA work will be coordinated with the Department of State. They will do the overt side, and we at CIA will do the covert side. Now look what he says here, okay? Having assumed greater international responsibilities than ever before in our history, this is in 1948, we cannot afford to leave unmobilized our resources for covert political warfare, for clandestine control over the hearts and minds of every citizen on earth. We cannot afford in the future, in perhaps more serious political crises, to scramble into impromptu covert operations as we did at the time of the Italian elections. Zoom, enhance. You guys all see this? We cannot afford in the future, in perhaps more serious political crises, to scramble into impromptu covert operations as we did at the time of the Italian elections. Meaning we need the capacity in place already, even if we like a country's government. We need to have a resistance movement in place. We need to have capacity built then by taking U.S. citizens' income taxes and paying to put foreign churches, foreign universities, foreign trade labor unions, foreign hospital workers, foreign agriculture workers, foreign media organizations on U.S. payroll under the banner of development work and working through a back channel to maintain control over the course of their direction and deployment of those resources, so that we don't need to scramble into overthrowing that government if we need it. We need to already have it in place everywhere in case we need it anywhere. Because this was a real close one, because we had to scramble these networks together. I'm trying to impress on you why this term capacity building is so important, and why that sort of esoteric phrase is how we describe these things. Because you build, you develop, you build the capacity of a front group, front organization, front company, front, religious group. You maintain a back channel for control, and it's activated at the given moment. Doesn't mean it immediately is used as an asset. It's not necessarily an asset, it's a capacity. And at the given moment, it will be converted into an asset being used. You guys following? I don't mean to keep beating this point home, but this is the language, and I want you guys to understand why we use this language, because we have another 50 years together, unless they get me. And we're going to be saying this a lot, so we're still getting to know each other. I wouldn't say this is our first date, but, we've been out a couple times. Things are going well. I kind of like you guys. I think you might kind of like me too. I don't know. So, this is just a little know your robot. KYC. So this is really, really important. Let's get back to this, okay? Established citizens, doctors, attorneys, businessmen, teachers will be recruited into social crusaders for the political group the CIA is promoting to topple the government in a paramilitary action. Each of those individuals will remain in their own sphere of influence to bring other people in the hospital systems and in the healthcare ecosystems into an alliance for the CIA-backed political group. The attorneys will exert influence on the other attorneys in the country, the national lawyers guilds in the country, the bar associations in the country, the courts in the country, to get them to support the political resistance group being backed by the CIA. The businessmen will keep being businessmen, but they will exert their influence to bring other captains of industry across the industrial sectors in the country or in their particular industry to align like a magnet in support for the CIA-backed resistance group. The teachers, and remember, we did like 5 office hours diatribes and like 2 streams on what Randy Weingarten, the head of the American Federation of Teachers, the largest teachers union in this country, was doing in Ukraine so many times. You guys remember all the streams we did on that and all the office hours we did on Randy Weingarten? Why is the head of the U.S. Teachers Union spending so much time in Ukraine? Understand, this is like, we've been over this a million times, so I don't want to like go back into that, but just go back to the streams and you'll see how many times we went over this. But again, because we control the teachers unions to control the education system and control the curriculum and control the propaganda, control the hearts and minds, and you can also then shut down the education system in walkouts or boycotts or strikes to bring the government to its knees. But this is a CIA guide on getting teachers, doctors, attorneys, and businessmen in a cluster cell, recruited as social crusaders for the CIA-backed cause. And then note what it says. Through a gradual process, these cells, your 10 teachers, 10 super teachers with a lot of influence in the teaching realm, your 10 lawyers with a lot of influence in the legal realm, your 10 captains of industry with a lot of influence in business, your 10 medical professionals with a lot of pull over the hospital systems, will each work within their own spheres of influence. And at the appropriate time, their influence will be used to fuse the groups together into a united front. Okay? This is super important because a lot of people who don't really understand the operational structuring, they're like, well, how is that? Oh, the CIA recruited, this random teacher, to promote this cause. That's so dumb. What, like this one teacher is going to cause a revolution? This one teacher is going to overthrow the country. They make $130K a year. They have a popular book. They can't bring down the government. That's so stupid. It's like, you don't understand how this works. There's a cluster cell, and they are a part of that cadre. They're a part of that cluster who's been recruited to exert their sphere of influence on that particular subsect. The teaching world, the curriculum, the teachers' unions. So that once that's aligned and everything else is aligned, it will be fused together. Once the crisis is induced, the trap door closes. The country's brought to a halt because their cell has successfully gotten pre-commitments from the teachers' unions. Their cell has successfully gotten pre-commitments from the major administrators and the major sponsors. In tandem with those pre-commitments secured by cells in other industries. This is making sense? Yeah, potential to kinetic energy is exactly right. So they come together in the crisis moment. So like in the case of BLM, the Transition Integrity Project frigging guide says, listen, this is a this BLM street muscle is a very, very powerful capacity. If we can if we can control it and we can build it up even bigger, we can use this to stop Trump from becoming president, even if he wins the election. Because again, what was the title of scenario 3? Clear Trump win. How to stop Trump from becoming the president, even if he clearly wins the election. Okay? The whole thing was about stopping Trump. And again, if you missed last week, or you just found out about me yesterday and didn't see my 10,000 other tweets on this, literally, they have a frigging appendix on how to stop Trumpism after Trump. But getting back to race being used by intelligence, folks. Again, being responsive to their demands so that they are responsive to a call to take to the streets. And we will need to support and resource new and emerging racial justice leaders. Now, notice the way they describe this. They did not say support and resource BLM. What did they say? Their success will depend on, and they being the Democrats. And remember, Bill Kristol was supporting this too, and Michael Steele from the Republicans. So the Democrats plus the Never Trump Republicans. Notice the phrase they use. Their success will depend on supporting and resourcing new and emerging, not racial justice movements, racial justice leaders, many of whom are not affiliated with formal institutions and coalitions. So they are cultivating their plan, which they openly wrote about and role-played in an insurrection simulator 5 months before the 2020 election, was to economically bribe, support, and resource a coterie of new and emerging racial justice leaders. Not the movement. They don't give a flying fuck about BLM. These are cold-hearted, cold calculating, cold-handed military and intelligence officials who hate Trump for their own reasons, structuring a domestic color revolution, a domestic intelligence operation to overthrow our government, saying the key to this success is going to be to create a cluster cell of bribed and captured leaders of the BLM movement, bring them into our formal institutions, and get them totally under our control so that we resource and support them, we develop them so that they're capable of doing this in November or in January of 2021. And that they are under our control through a back channel. And the back channel is going to be these new and emerging leaders in the movement who will be able to direct the capacity at the given moment if Trump wins. You guys getting this yet? Is that making sense? Now, remember, in that time between June and November 2020, how much effort went into bringing all of the other different aspects of society, of the civil populace, into solidarity with BLM. The medical profession said it was okay for BLM to go out and riot, even though COVID-19 was at its peak. The legal establishment backed them, paid for their legal fees, got the local DA's offices to drop the cases, bailed them out with huge bail support funds. The Chamber of Commerce gave them $50 billion, businessmen. And of course, the teachers' unions. Following to a T the very thing that the Transition Integrity Project, again run by senior Pentagon official and CIA Blue Badge holder Rosa Brooks, said would be necessary to do in order to develop and control the organization by resourcing BLM community leaders. So it's a cell structure, industry by industry. And again, we've gone over this more times than I can count, but notice how it's the same cell structure for Operation Gladio, where it's divided by sphere of influence in, getting a cluster cell of journalists, getting a cluster cell of businessmen, a cluster cell of bankers, a cluster cell of regulators, a cluster cell of politicians. But then we also see the same cluster cell just a few years ago in the Integrity Initiative. Right? The same cluster cell chart that once again had the cluster cells for all the different industries and journalists and politicians in all the different NATO countries that were used in order to run censorship operations against right-wing populist groups in Europe to stop the Russians. After from 2015 to 2019, after Crimea. This is where Nina Jankowicz came from. Again, we went over this. This is why I've been tracking Nina Jankowicz since like November 2018, because her name appears in the UK cluster. UK General Inner Core, Russia focus, of a busted NATO clandestine operation to control narratives on the internet. But notice how it's segmented by clusters, okay? It's the same thing. Control of mass meetings and mass assemblies. Oh, this one's really good. This is a great one. One of my favorite parts of this document. We're already at 7:24. We're coming up on 2 hours already. So again, we are still on our CIA Psychological Operations Guide, declassified only 7 years ago. Control of meetings and mass assemblies, so mass gatherings of people. The control of mass meetings in support of resistance movements is carried out internally through a covert commando element, bodyguards, messengers, incident initiators. I love this. Poster carriers, also used to give signals, and slogan shouters, all under the control of the external commando element. Okay, let me explain this. And please, whatever you do, do not think about everything you know about January 6th. So when they say control of meetings and mass assemblies, they're talking about street action, okay? They're talking about mass assemblies of resistance movement people in the streets. And what they're talking about is getting a peaceful protest in place and then making the peaceful protest turn violent because of a federal agent or federal informant equivalent, i.e. somebody who is part of a small group of need-to-know agitators working directly or indirectly with the CIA or a CIA cutout. This is what the CIA Psychological Operations Guide is. And by the way, notice how much of psychological operations work is just about rent-a-riots. Think about how many PSYOPs guides and videos we've been over now, and how in almost every single one of the PSYOPs guides is about getting people to take to the streets and to protest and riot. Understand, this is like what PSYOPs work is. Other than planting fake news stories, other than creating and disseminating and securing commitments from the media to spread CIA and Pentagon and State Department disinformation. That's like one half of it. The other half of it is, we call it PSYOPs, but it's just rent-a-riot capacity building. Because that's the end stage. That's how you get the transition of power. But notice bodyguards play an important element in getting riot. Because what they're saying here is, we want this to go from a protest movement to effectively a paramilitary challenge to the state. And notice that they say slogan shouters. It's the CIA saying we need slogan shouters. We're going to activate all these different elements we have in the crowd. Bodyguards, messengers, incident initiators. People to initiate, people in the crowd who everybody else thinks is just a general protester. But that guy goes out and does some crazy shit, throws a Molotov cocktail at a police officer to initiate an incident that escalates it, as we're going to see. But again, the CIA even calls them incident initiators. When the cadres, and again, cadres means like a cluster cell group. A small group of people, could be 2 or 3 people, who are keyed into the operation, but everybody else thinks they're just like us. They're a teacher, they're a lawyer, they're a business person, they're a protester. When the cadres are placed in or recruited from organizations such as labor unions, youth groups, agricultural organizations, or professional associations, they will begin to manipulate the group's objectives. The psychological apparatus of our movement, by means of these internal cadres, will prepare a mental attitude which, at the crucial moment, could become involved in a fury of justified violence. So here we see it yet again. Yet again. Capacity building, control, and then deployment. The conversion of the potential energy into kinetic energy. Recruiting from labor unions, youth groups, professional associations, each manipulating their own group from the inside through these clandestine operatives that we have recruited in each of these places, shifting the mental attitude of those groups to hate their own government and to support the spunky CIA-backed resistance movement, so that at the crucial moment, this is like the 5th time we've seen them use this. At the crucial moment, we will convert the anger into a fury of justified violence. This is the CIA planning to psychologically manipulate millions of people in a country to go out and commit physical acts of violence. Let me say it again. This is the U.S. State Department, through the Central Intelligence Agency, using U.S. taxpayer dollars, with their own printed standard operating procedure manual on how to cognitively manipulate millions of people in any country on earth to get them psychologically possessed in anger against its own government, and then channel that anger into physical violence which they justify in their own minds because of the anger that the CIA infused them with. This can be carried out through a small group of resistance operatives infiltrated within the masses, who will have the mission of agitating, giving the impression that there are many of them and that they have great popular support. So we can get millions of people to take to the streets and commit acts of violence in a, dare I say, riot that is rented, and giving the impression that the masses are really represent the entire people. Using the tactics of a force of 200 to 300 agitators, one can create a demonstration in which 10,000 to 20,000 could take part. All we need are 200 back channels, 200 human assets that we've capacity built, and we can get 20,000 people to commit a violent riot in a fury of violence against their own government. Jennifer says, please share the link. I just put it right here. Can I read that again? Using the tactics of a force of 200 to 300 agitators, one can create a demonstration in which 10,000 to 20,000 could take part. Remember, the purpose of the demonstration includes committing violence against the police, against the security forces, against the sitting government. And part of that is because that will provoke a crackdown from the police, and US CIA media will then say they're oppressing their own people, they're using violence against their own people, this disqualifies them as a legitimate government. We now can justify international sanctions. We can now tell Europe you can't have an oil deal with Nicaragua because they've committed humanitarian violations. They're in violations of the UN Convention on Universal Human Rights because they've put down, through force, our own violent CIA-backed and CIA-created riot. But the CIA is even setting its own these pawns to get beaten up by the police and the security forces because they want to hold that up. This is the other side of the operation, is using the crackdown as justification for formal diplomatic action from the State Department, to cut economic ties, to kick them off the dollar, to seize their national assets.